Okay, are you ready for this? We're diving into some heavy stuff today. The war in Ukraine, and things are getting really complicated. We've got a major policy shift from the Biden administration, and North Korea is making a surprise appearance on the battlefield. It's a bit unsettling, to be honest, but don't worry. We're going to break it all down for you. We've got two great sources today, articles from the Financial Times and the Washington Post, and by the end, you'll understand exactly what's going on, why it matters, and what it could mean for the future.
Yeah, we're approaching the 1000th day of Russia's full-scale invasion, and this could be a turning point. These articles highlight some developments that could reshape the entire conflict.
So first things first, President Biden just gave the green light for Ukraine to use U.S.-made long-range missiles,
The ATACMS.
the ATACMS, for limited strikes inside Russia. This is a huge deal, right?
It is. This reverses U.S. policy completely. Up until now, the Biden administration was hesitant to send these weapons, worried it might provoke Russia. But something has clearly changed their calculus.
And it's not just any old missile. We're talking about a weapon with a range of 300 kilometers, almost 200 miles. So that means Ukraine can now hit targets deep inside Russian territory,
Not just along the front lines.
vaguely places they couldn't reach before.
Exactly. Think about the implications. Ukraine could potentially strike key Russian command centers, supply depots, even air bases that were previously considered safe.
Whoa, okay, so things just got real. And this is all happening just 2 months before Biden leaves office and President-elect Trump takes the reins. We know Trump has talked about ending the war, but he hasn't given any concrete plans. I wonder what this means for his approach.
It's hard to say at this point, but it certainly adds another layer of complexity to an already volatile situation.
And we can't forget about Putin's reaction. He's already warned that any attacks on Russian soil using Western weapons would be seen as a direct attack by NATO. So the stakes are incredibly high right now.
Yes, the potential for escalation is a serious concern.
Okay, so the U.S. is sending long-range missiles. Putin's making threats. What on earth prompted this sudden shift in policy? The articles both point to a new player entering the game, North Korea.
This is where things get really interesting and potentially very dangerous. We've learned that 12,000 North Korean troops have been deployed to Russia's Kursk region, which, as you know, directly borders Ukraine.
Hold on. North Korean troops are actually in Russia now. This is the first time a foreign military has directly joined the war on Russia's side, isn't it?
It is, and it marks a significant escalation of the conflict. We know that North Korea has already been providing Russia with missiles and artillery shells since the early days of the war, but sending troops is a whole different ballgame.
It almost sounds like Russia and North Korea are forming a sort of pact. Is that what we're seeing here?
It's certainly starting to look that way. The article suggests that in exchange for troops and weapons, Russia is providing North Korea with advanced military technology and funding for their own missile programs. So it's a mutually beneficial arrangement, at least for the two regimes.
Okay, that's pretty unsettling. This is a partnership between two countries that are both known for their, shall we say, unpredictable behavior and disregard for international norms. And it doesn't sound like this alliance is sitting well with the U.S.
Not at all. There are serious concerns that even more North Korean troops may be on their way, and that this partnership could extend beyond just the immediate conflict in Ukraine. The U.S. is worried about the long-term implications of closer military cooperation between these two nations.
So we've got a major U.S. policy shift, Russian threats, and a new player on the field who, let's face it, is a bit of a wild card. Where does this leave Ukraine? They're basically facing two adversaries now.
That's right. And it's important to understand how all of this looks from their perspective.
Okay, let's do that. What's Ukraine's take on all of this, and what are they hoping to achieve?
Well, from Ukraine's perspective, the arrival of North Korean troops on top of the ongoing Russian offensives only makes their need for those long-range weapons more urgent. They see those ATACMS as a way to potentially even the odds, to disrupt Russian operations, and to defend the territory they've fought so hard to hold on to, particularly in that Kursk region, where they're now facing troops from both Russia and North Korea.
Yeah, it's almost like those long-range missiles are a way for Ukraine to say, hey, we're not backing down. We're going to make you pay for this invasion,
Yeah,
even if it means hitting you on your own soil.
that's a good way to put it. It's about increasing the costs for Russia, and to some extent for North Korea as well. By demonstrating that Ukraine can strike back effectively, it might make both countries think twice about their current strategies.
So there's a psychological element to this as well, not just a military one.
Absolutely. If Russia starts to believe that the costs of continuing this war are outweighing the potential benefits, they might be more willing to come to the negotiating table. And from Ukraine's perspective, those ATACMS could be a powerful bargaining chip in any future peace talks.
But isn't there a risk that giving Ukraine these powerful weapons could backfire and provoke Russia into escalating the conflict even further?
That's the big unknown, and it's a concern that's been voiced by many experts. Putin has already shown that he's not afraid to resort to brutal tactics, and there's no guarantee that he won't respond to ATACMS strikes, with even more destructive and unpredictable actions.
Could he target Western interests, maybe even outside of Ukraine? That's a scary thought.
It's certainly a possibility, and one that policymakers have to consider very carefully. Putin might see this as a direct challenge from NATO and feel the need to demonstrate his own strength and resolve. It's impossible to predict how far he's willing to go.
And then there's the added uncertainty of the upcoming change in U.S. leadership. How President-elect Trump will handle this situation is anyone's guess at this point.
That's right. While Trump has talked about wanting to end the war, his past comments about Putin and NATO raise a lot of questions about how he'll approach this conflict. Will he continue to support Ukraine with weapons and aid? Or will he try to cut a deal with Putin, even if it means making concessions that are unfavorable to Ukraine? We just don't know yet.
Okay, so lots of uncertainties on the horizon. But shifting back to Ukraine for a moment, it seems like President Zelensky has been pretty vocal about needing these long-range weapons. The Washington Post even quotes him saying, "If the response is weak, we should expect the numbers of foreign soldiers on our soil to increase." That sounds pretty dire.
Yeah, he's been making the case for these weapons for months, arguing that they're essential for Ukraine's survival. He's even specifically called out Russia and North Korea, saying that two countries are against us, against Ukraine. That statement really highlights the sense of urgency and the feeling that Ukraine is facing an existential threat.
It's clear that Ukraine feels like they're backed into a corner, facing overwhelming odds. They're looking to these ATACMS as a way to fight back, to deter further aggression, and hopefully to create some leverage in any potential peace negotiations.
That's a good summary of their position, but it's important to remember that the decision to provide these missiles wasn't made lightly. There are real risks involved, and the potential consequences are significant, both for Ukraine and for the wider international community.
Right, this isn't some video game where you just unlock a new weapon and suddenly everything becomes easier. This is real life with real consequences.
Exactly, and that brings us to another crucial point: the human cost of this war. It's easy to get caught up in the discussions about military strategy and geopolitical maneuvering, but we can't lose sight of the fact that this conflict is causing immense suffering for millions of people.
You're absolutely right. In the midst of all this talk about missiles and troop movements, it's easy to forget that there are real people on the ground whose lives have been turned upside down by this war.
Millions of Ukrainians have been forced to flee their homes. Countless lives have been lost, and the trauma inflicted by this conflict will have long-lasting consequences. And as the war drags on, the human cost just keeps rising.
It's heartbreaking. And while these ATACMS might help Ukraine defend itself militarily, we have to be mindful of the potential humanitarian impact as well.
Absolutely. Any use of military force has to be weighed against the potential risks to civilian populations.
Okay, so we've talked about the policy shift, the North Korea factor, the potential benefits and risks of providing Ukraine with these long-range missiles, and the very real human cost of this war. Is there anything else we need to consider as we try to make sense of this whole situation?
Yes. There's one more crucial aspect we need to address: the broader implications for global security. This isn't just a regional conflict, it's a reflection of wider geopolitical trends that could reshape the international order.
Okay, now we're getting into the really big picture stuff. What exactly do you mean by that?
Well, think about it. The war in Ukraine has exposed vulnerabilities in the international system, the fragility of alliances, and the willingness of some nations to use force, or the threat of force, to achieve their goals. And the involvement of North Korea adds a whole new layer of complexity and danger to the mix.
It's like all the old rules are being thrown out the window. We're seeing alliances shift, power dynamics change, and a growing sense of uncertainty about the future.
Exactly, and that raises a lot of questions. What does this mean for the future of global security? Are we heading toward a more multipolar world, one with competing power centers and a higher risk of conflict? And what role will the United States play in this new world order? These are all questions that world leaders and, frankly, all of us need to be grappling with right now.
It's definitely a lot to wrap our heads around. But hey, that's why we do these deep dives, right? To take these complex global issues, break them down, and help you connect the dots.
And after listening to this, you're likely more informed about this situation than the average person. You understand the nuances, the different perspectives, the potential consequences. Knowledge is power, especially in a situation like this.
Absolutely. You're not just passively scrolling through headlines anymore. You're actively engaging with the information, thinking critically, and forming your own conclusions. That's what makes this deep dive so valuable.
It equips you to have more informed conversations, to challenge assumptions, to see the world through a more critical lens.
So as we wrap things up, what's the one big takeaway you want our listener to walk away with today?
I think the key takeaway here is that this situation in Ukraine, as complex and volatile as it is a microcosm of the larger challenges facing the world today. We're seeing a shift in the global balance of power, a rise in authoritarianism, and a growing willingness to challenge the existing international order.
And the decisions made by leaders in the coming weeks and months, particularly with the transition to a new U.S. administration, will have a profound impact on the course of events, not just in Ukraine, but around the world.
Exactly. The stakes are incredibly high, and the choices made today will shape the world we live in tomorrow.
Well, that's certainly a sobering thought. But as you said earlier, knowledge is power, and by understanding these complex issues, we can at least try to navigate these uncertain times with a bit more clarity and purpose.
I agree. And perhaps by engaging in these conversations and sharing this knowledge with others, we can collectively contribute to finding solutions and building a more peaceful and stable future.
Well said. So to our listener out there, we encourage you to keep learning, stay engaged, and don't be afraid to ask tough questions. The world needs more informed and engaged citizens like you.
And remember, even in the face of daunting global challenges, there's always hope. Hope for a better future, hope for peace, and hope for a world where dialogue and understanding prevail over conflict and division.
Beautifully put. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and keep diving deep.